Hey, you are so welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. My name is Sean Booth, and today we're doing things just a little bit different. As you can see, we're doing this on Zoom as we have the honor of having Pastor Larry Brey all the way from Elevation Church in North Carolina with us today. We get to chat with them and connect with them. And Larry and his wife, Jeanette, they have 4 children, and he is one of the pastors and founding leaders of Elevation Church, which is one of the largest and most influential church in the world at the moment. And I had the honor of meeting LB back in 2016 during a trip that I had there. And instantly, he was just incredibly generous and wanted to know everything about what God was doing in Ireland through the church and how he could help. And over these past few years, we've been able to build a relationship. And over this past year in particular, I remember when going through the beginning of this pandemic, I just reached out to him and said, "Hey, Albie, is there any way that we could chat over the phone and connect and just glean from your wisdom and your insight and how we can lead through this?" And so he's been coaching me how to lead through these uncertain times, sharing ideas and methods and ways of just continuing to innovate and lead through this difficult season. And I honestly believe that he's one of the most genuinely loving people that I've ever met. He is passionate about the local church. He's passionate about seeing others fall in love with Jesus. And he's passionate about seeing his people, the church, grow and continue to grow in Jesus. And I know he's an incredible leader that you're going to want to get out a notebook, write things down that you hear. I know that he's going to be able to speak into your life and encourage you. So really hope that you enjoy this conversation today. Let's listen in. Larry, thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate you taking the opportunity just to spend this time with myself and obviously everyone who's watching and listening. And so thanks for being with us today.
Well, thanks for having me on. I love you, Pastor Sean. You're a great man. Like to spend time with you is a blessing for me. So I'm the one who's blessed in this whole thing.
It's an Irish blessing for sure.
My kids love it because I try to pretend like I've got an Irish accent around the house. And I would not do it because I told my kids I was going to be on with you today. And they're like, do you do your Irish accent with Pastor Sean? I'm like, no, no.
Yeah, we won't humiliate you just yet. We'll give you a little bit of time and see how the accent grows. But look, you've been such an encouragement to me, and especially this past year. And you've just been such a strength and support to both myself and Gillian, and just coaching me and helping me, directing me through things and the boundaries and everything that we've been facing. So I just wanted to take this opportunity with our platform, with our podcast, the Roundtable Podcast, just to have an opportunity for others to hear your story, hear your heart as a man, a leader, a father. And so I just want to dive in and just start the conversation. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about who is Larry Brey?
Oh, that's a dark story, man. Like that might be categorized as a drama. That might be categorized as a thriller, a suspense. Like who knows what that section of the library that story would be in. But I love you. I'm grateful for you. I remember when you came stateside here and I got to hang with you a little bit. I was just impressed with your desire, just your love for the Lord and your love for the church. And so I don't know what it looks like in Ireland. You're hearing the story through what you're sitting in and through COVID. It's a tough time and your faith is being tested. And thank you for being an anchor for others in a season of chaos. And you really are. I know that sometimes you don't feel like it. I know that I struggle with this. Like, I don't think I got it all together, but thank you for making yourself available, and you and Jillian for just being people of faith, because people are looking for substance right now and you're giving it to them.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Now, you said like, who is Larry Brey? Like, oh man, like that's scary. Like,
well, go for it. We want to hear the scary story.
So everybody calls me LB. And so, but at least all my friends do. They call me LB. And it's funny. So if I were to give you a story about LB, because there's such a thing in our church, because I'm part of Elevation Church here in Charlotte, North Carolina is where we're based out of. We've got multiple locations stateside, and we've got a global presence. And our pastor, Pastor Stephen's the greatest pastor on the planet. And there's a thing in our church called being LB'd. Okay. And so this thing of being LB'd is when you get into an interaction and you feel like you're being like seen and like known. It's like that, like being
Okay.
LB'd. But once upon a time, being LB'd would have been like you got run over because you got in my way. And so it's changed a little bit over
Okay.
time.
Okay. Right. Softened a little bit, would you say?
I think so, a little more grace with it. I grew up in a home, one of 5 kids growing up, good Catholic family from Minnesota here in the States. Lonnie, Luann, Leslie, Larry, and Lance. So all 5 of us started with the same letter. It was a
That's
blessing
fantastic.
because by the time your mom got to the right name, you had a chance to get out of the room because she'd never get it right. And, but I grew up out with a father who repeated what he was handed when he was a kid.
Okay.
His dad was an alcoholic and a very brutal man, and so my dad repeated the pattern that he saw growing up. So that's what he did to us. So I grew up in a home that was filled with that, and my dad made those lifestyle choices, and I spent most of my young adult life just running away from there. And I think the reason I felt like being LB'd is I felt like anytime someone got close, I had to protect myself because I can't let you get close. So everybody else leaned in. And my dad, when I was a kid, he would always lean in to tear you down. So I just assumed everybody wanted to fight. So automatically my hands went up. It's exhausting living life like everything's a fight waiting to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
And that must be the Irish inside of you, the Catholic Irish. I don't know what kind of makeup you are, but that sounds like it's
Catholic, but
okay. Okay, we're close enough. European.
yeah,
No,
but it was though. It was like, and it is funny looking back because the last thing you wanted as a kid is for that to define you. So but a calling from God is not running from something; it's running to something.
yeah.
I spent the first 30 years of my life running from that, but what you run from, you recreate. And so I realized, like, I didn't meet Christ, Sean, until I was in my late 20s. I was 27 when I met Christ. No, actually, I'm sorry. I was 25. I was in graduate college. And I came home one night drunk and I looked in the mirror and I saw the person I hated the most. I was becoming my dad.
Right.
It was in that moment that I broke the mirror, but it was in the bottom that we really saw the grace of God come into my life. But it wasn't. So I submitted myself in that moment for him to be my savior. But man, it's taken the rest of my life to let him be my Lord.
Very good. That's amazing. And so, you're married, you have 4 kids.
Yeah.
Did that happen soon after that you actually gave your life to the Lord?
No, I gave my life to Christ, like I said, in graduate college when I was 25. I didn't get married until I was 30.
Okay.
And so we've got 4 kids right now, a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And so we got started a little bit later. And for me, my background is in PT sports medicine. I was a sports trainer is what I was. Went to college, got my master's degree. I was actually teaching at a college. And so my background is a college professor. And
right.
I like telling people I was a college professor because I wanted you to think I was smart. And I wanted you to ask me. And so when I got married, I was teaching it was at a Christian college, but you know what, Sean, I had my career plan. I was going to start working on my doctorate. I was going to become one of the leaders in the industry. And I got my plan, Lord. So just bless my plan.
Yeah.
Year 1, I got, so I was working there for 5 years. I started working at the college, youngest faculty they hired when I was 27. And then I got married at age 30. When I got married, my oldest brother, Lonnie, gets diagnosed with cancer.
Okay.
So I'm sharing my faith with him. And what I realized is the faith I wanted him to have, I wasn't fully living. I wasn't smoking what I was selling.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, trust God. You can trust him. And I trusted him with my eternity, but not my present reality.
Yeah.
So he had a mole on his face. It spread in his lymph nodes and his lungs. And the doctors gave him a bad report. Night before they go in and do surgery, I get a chance to lead him in a prayer to give his life to Jesus. I'm 30 years old, first person I ever led to faith. And I remember it. I remember it. Then we prayed that God would physically heal him. Lord, heal my brother. Heal him of cancer. The next day they go in, they can't find the cancer anywhere.
Wow. Okay.
He was physically
Miracle.
healed. They couldn't find a trace of cancer in his body. And it wrecked me. I'm like, maybe I'm created for more than what I've become.
Yeah.
Maybe the purpose of my life is way more than my 401k, get a big boat and die. Like, maybe there's more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I started wrestling with God. Year 5 of teaching at the college, I came to the point of saying, you know what, Lord, I need to trust you with my identity, because my identity was as a college professor. So I came to the end of teaching. I said, I just need to become unemployed. I need to trust God with my future. I needed to go from being, hi, I'm Larry, the college professor, to, hey, I'm Larry, I'm unemployed. So
That's a big step of faith.
It didn't make sense, Sean. It made no sense at all. But God so clearly spoke in my spirit that says, you have built your whole life trying to become what you wanted, and you'll never see what I want you to be if you keep building up your own kingdom. And so I turn in my resignation. I go home. I put my box of stuff from my office on the kitchen table. I'm like, now what, God? The phone rings. It's my brother, Lonnie. I said, what's up, Lonnie? He said, it's a bad day. He said, I just got done at the doctor's and they told me the cancer's back.
Okay.
And he said, it's in my brain. They're only giving me a couple weeks to live. So I knew what I was supposed to do. I hop on a plane and I fly back home to where I was from. And I knew my assignment was to help him pass away, help him die.
Wow.
I would have never put my career on hold for him, Sean. So God had to take away my career so that I would find my calling.
Very good. That's great.
I go back to Minnesota and his hair is falling out. You hug him, you could feel the tumors.
Wow.
And so I said, man, let me clean you up a little bit. So I put him in a chair and I said, let me cut your hair. I said, let me clean you up. And so I grabbed the clippers and I remember, man, I get choked. It's been almost 20 years since that moment, Sean. And I remember cutting his hair, and I remember God speaking to my spirit so loudly. And he said, this is my church. Care for my church. Love my church. Feed my church. And he passes away 2 days later. I come back to North Carolina, and I just throw myself into the local church serving because it was what God told me to do. Yeah. 6 months after that, they say, why don't we hire you? I'm like, I'm not doing it for a job. It's not a career. It's a calling. 6 months after that, we hire a new worship leader. He's this bald head guy, graduated from college, goatee, baggy clothes. Pastor Stephen, my pastor.
Yeah.
And as soon as I met him, God said, that's the church you're called to build.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so, yeah, so many times our career will get in the way of really finding our calling. I'm not telling people to quit their jobs. I am calling to examine, why am I doing my job? And if the only reason I'm doing it is for me to make an income, I'm living beneath what Jesus died for me to be.
Yeah. That's a powerful moment, and it's an emotional moment when you were cutting his hair and hearing God speak to you. And I know that so many people, they're going through those moments right now. Some of them facing so much suffering and pain and suffocating, with everything that's going on. But not all of us have the strength to be able to see God in it and to be able to help us to take that next step. What was it in you that caused you to go, right, I'm going to use this for his glory. I'm going to say, how can God use me in this? What was it that really clicked for you in that?
Well, I need to give the real version of it. I cussed out God. Okay. I mean, I was so angry. I was like, God, why did you heal my brother only to let cancer come back? I was like, God, that seems mean. That seems evil. Why would you do that? He's finally turned his life around. He struggled with drugs and alcohol his whole life. He was in and out of jail and rehab. And now he's finally clean. And now he gets cancer again? Wow. Yeah. It wasn't all rainbows and unicorns. I had so much anger and guilt, just like somebody watching this podcast right now, Sean. This is why I'm so glad you're doing it, because somebody is sitting in the devastation of a loved one, and you've got that empty seat at the kitchen table. Yeah. Like, where's God in all that? And my heart goes out to them because I know what it was like for me in that moment. That's where it started. You never see purpose in the pain. It only happens when you look back on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't see in the middle of it. I didn't remember until later that one of the last conversations my brother and I had, where he was lucid, he looks at me and he says, "Is it okay to cry?" We're having lunch on a Tuesday. He passes away on Wednesday night. And I just started crying. And I said, "Yeah, Jesus wept, John 11:35. But then we had to break it down and he looks at me at the end of that conversation and he goes, "Larry," he says, "I don't think I could ever say this, but I'm grateful God gave me cancer."
Wow.
I couldn't say that.
Yeah.
But he says, "It's the only way I would have ever given my life to him." Woo, I'm like, Lonnie, you got greater faith than I do. Because I can't say that. Looking back, I can see the blessing that came out of it. But the Bible says God works all things. He doesn't say all things are good. He says he works them for good.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say cancer is good. I think it's of the devil, but God used it for his good. I only see that looking back on it. I would tell people, be careful not to label things in the middle of pain.
Very good. Yeah.
Don't label it good or bad.
Yeah.
You can't see it until you look back on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that moment then that caused you to get involved in church and in church leadership, and you have, when I met you back in 2016, and we had an encounter for a couple of hours, not even a full day, but immediately you could sense the authenticity from you, and that has continued on for almost 5 years and has just continued to grow. And one of the things I was just thinking just the other day was, you are such an influencer. You probably have hundreds of people vying for your attention, and yet you would take the time to spend with me and just speak into my life and encourage your church. And that, where does that come from then? Because I'm sure you're doing that every day. You talk about getting LB'd, and on the negative side, right, railroaded, running over people. But where does that warmth, compassion, and love for others, does it come from that moment, or how did that flourish and grow?
I think whatever you focus on is going to flourish.
Very good. Yeah.
It really is. And so when we started the ministry, here's the thing. Elevation started 15 years ago. We celebrated our 15th anniversary. And what we've seen God through the ministry is truly remarkable. But when we started, I felt this sense of having to prove myself, like you didn't make a mistake in hiring me, like I'm good, you can trust me. So because my worth, I've always struggled with worth issues.
Okay.
And maybe some people who are more faith-filled than me will graduate out of a struggle, but the struggle doesn't go away, because I think the struggle is a gift that creates dependence upon him. One of my constant struggles has been at the level of identity. And so worth. And so when we started, my worth would come through my accomplishment. And it got results, but it also had liabilities and drawbacks. So yes, LB is going to get the job done, but he might have run some people over to get it done.
Right. Okay.
What happened is my pastor sat me down and said, "You're a liability. You'll either change this in you or you can't be at this level of leadership." And he loved me enough to show me my liabilities and my weaknesses so that God's grace could start to grow the things in my life. But the only way I focused on it is he forced me to see it.
Very good.
And I think a lot of us struggle with feeling like we're inadequate. But why would I look at something that makes me feel inadequate? Why would I focus on something that makes me feel shame or unworthy? So the last thing we want to do is to look at something that reinforces all those fears.
Yeah.
So, but it was a space of saying, do I want to really love people, or do I want to use them to get a job done? So the leadership growth for me was God had to break my heart for people, because it began with me seeing how I hurt people.
That's amazing. And so, just to talk about growth for a moment, you started off, you went to church. You started off and, we got involved in the church and obviously decided to be a part of a new church plant that wasn't like any other church plant. You just celebrated 15 years. It went from strength to strength, incredible story of growth, at lightning speed. But then that causes you to have to grow at lightning speed.
Oh, yeah.
How did you do that within that time period? I'm sure you're still having to grow. What are some of the things that you're obviously flexible, you're obviously pliable to be able to grow. What was that like?
It's painful. Everybody looks at the story of our ministry like, that's awesome. And it is. But it also creates these things like, whether it's full nets or empty nets, they're problems. A full net has got problems. Ask the disciples taking in all the fish, but so are the empty nets and they weren't eating. But I think the biggest change in it all is for me to change. And I've had to reinvent myself at least 8 times in this ministry. I've had 14 different job titles. And some of the reinventions were forced because you better change. And some of them were felt. I just knew I needed to change. And so that's the hard part about ministry, because what I really crave is a pattern. I don't know if you're like this at all, Sean. I want to figure out the pattern and work the pattern. But by the time I got the pattern figured out, the pattern has changed. But I don't want to change because I got the pattern figured out.
Yeah.
How many of our ministries are just going through the motions and we're mimicking a pattern rather than living in relationship?
Wow, that's great.
We're led by the Spirit to be. Jesus never performed any of his miracles the same way. Why? Because I think he didn't want his disciples mimicking a pattern to manipulate a miracle. It is easy in religion for us to think, if I do these things, God will do this. God's not a celestial vending machine that I can push a button.
Yeah.
And so it forces me to be dependent upon him, but also a willingness to be teachable and to change.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And when we speak and we have our conversations, it's not about the how-to. How do I do this? How do I do that? Oftentimes we're speaking about those things, and you're really encouraging me in that area. And when we were speaking last time, you're sharing me about how you're encouraging others. In this season in particular, what are you seeing happening in people's lives right now that you're encouraging that? Because we're all going through those painful processes. The patterns is thrown out the window. We want, everyone's saying, when will things go back to normal? And when will we find that pattern? How are you encouraging people in that right now?
Well, I think it's got to start with the permission for humanity. Anytime you go through uncertainty, you'll always go back to what's comfortable.
Very nice.
So why are people in your country and in mine returning to old patterns? Not because they love what they used to do, it's comfortable. And so when you're living with uncertainty, you will go to what's comfortable. So why are people revisiting alcohol addiction and drug addictions and thought patterns and all these dysfunctional things that we thought we had left behind us?
Yeah.
It's not because we don't love God, it's we don't know how to deal with the uncertainty. So what we've got to do as leaders is to, one, understand my patterns to go back to. So when I don't know what to do, I don't know how to make sense of anything. Okay, where am I going for validation? When everything I've known to validate myself is thrown out the window, it's probably going to be a dysfunctional place. So we've got to change the way that we lead, the way that we preach, and the way that we teach. People don't need platitudes and principles. They need vulnerable and authentic.
Yes.
So when somebody watching this podcast can hear you, Sean, say, you mean you got mad at the kids and you yelled at them? Yes, I did that this morning. It's
multiple times.
but when I live in a world that feels like, as a pastor, I can't be vulnerable and honest about what I'm really struggling with or dealing with, I create a culture that does that for everybody else, because the leaders always go first.
Yeah.
And so where I would want to encourage people right now is it's okay to have some humanity. It doesn't nullify God's glory.
That's good. Yeah. Just touching on that as we finish up, one of the things you shared with me last time, it really has, I've been just mulling over in my head that this is the time that can bring out the worst in us. It can bring out those, if you go back to what you said at the beginning, the fighting, the putting the fists up, it can bring out the worst in us, but also it can be an opportunity to deal with the worst in us. It can be an opportunity for introspection and self-awareness.
Yeah.
How are you doing that personally right now? I know it's a very, very personal question to ask, but not to go into detail about it, but how are you doing that in a practical basis right now with yourself and your own journey?
Well, again, I think it's having self-awareness and spirit awareness. Self-awareness is recognizing your patterns. So you got into a fight at 9 o'clock at night with your wife. The fight didn't start at 9 o'clock at night. It started with a feeling at 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So where I start to recognize my patterns is to ask the questions, where did that come from? What was really going on? And my wife is the world's best at helping me identify the right feeling or the right emotion. So, Sean, a smart person, if I were to ask him, how many emotions do you have? The smart person would be able to say, oh, list maybe 10 or 12. Okay. Separate human, unique individual emotions, people have identified more than 300. Do you know how many you live in that are called safe emotions? 2, maybe 3. So you've got 300 lanes of traffic getting squeezed down into a 2-lane highway. And we wonder why we have an emotional traffic jam. So what it's realizing is I'm not angry, but it's expressed as anger because that was safe.
Yes, very good.
So my wife has me play the game. What's the real emotion? No, you weren't angry. You were disappointed. No, you weren't angry. You were feeling shame. No, you weren't angry. You were dealing with rejection. And it changes, but safe is fists up. Yes. That's comfortable for me because I'm a fighter.
Yeah.
But that was the only safe emotion I had. So for the person who's in a marriage where their spouse is always angry, they're not always angry. They just learn how to have a safe expression of all their anger emotions through anger. That's what I'm learning about myself. The other part I'm learning is to realize that sometimes God gives us a gift by revealing things to us when we need to see them. Here's an example. I've broken 13 bones, Sean. I broke this wrist. I got a metal plate in this arm right here. Happened when I was like 13. Probably about 5 years ago, I was lifting really heavy weights for me. And my wrist started to kill me. So I go to my friend who is an orthopedist, and he takes an x-ray. And he said, oh, when you were a kid, you broke through the growth plate and it stopped growing. It's like a half a centimeter shorter than what it should be.
Right.
I said, why is it started to bother me now? He said, it's always been there. You've just never had enough weight on it to expose it. So why is somebody having all of these struggles? It's always been there. Yeah. You've just now had enough weight on it to expose it. And what I want to flip it, here's the flip. Gosh, we got to have a flip. Faith will give you a flip. Rather than feeling like you failed, you need to look at it and say, God, thank you for knowing that I'm ready to see what you want me to see. And God has covered you until you're ready to see this next thing. Yeah. God's showing people. And if we feel shame, we won't look at it. Yeah. But if we see it as grace, saying God says, now we're ready to deal with it, now we can see it as a gift.
Yeah. Wow. Such incredible wisdom. Look, Albie, thanks so much. And I could speak to you for hours. We could go so much deeper than that. But I just love your authenticity, your vulnerability, and that others would see that in you. And as a leader, like, that is so important for us right now to be vulnerable leaders and to share that and vulnerable, but growing within that. And using that for a purpose. So look, thanks so much. We love you guys. I know that you're supposed to celebrate your 20-year anniversary in Ireland. just last year. We know we can't wait to see you in person and
Can't
have
wait.
you over. But love to Jeanette and the kids also. And thank you so much for sharing with us today. I really appreciate it.
Love you, my friend.
What an incredible story and what incredible insight. And I love the vulnerability. I love you can hear the realness and the authenticity that came from LB today. And I hope that encouraged you and where you are at, and that you will be able to find purpose, the purpose that God's placed in your life, the calling that God's placed on your life, even in the midst of this painful time, this difficult time, maybe in the midst of the trauma that you're experiencing and the storm that you're going through, that you would know that God has got greater on the other side, and he can turn all things together for his good. So don't forget, we're back here. We're going to be back here at the beginning of April next month, but also this month we're at Open Arms is our Vision Month, and on Vision Sunday on the 28th of March, encourage you to be with us. And don't forget as well, we're celebrating Open Arms Dublin next Sunday at 11 a.m. It's going to be great to be there, but I hope that you have a great week. Enjoy. We'll see you next month.